So Thomas, who was Ivan Marx?
Ivan Marx was a man who became involved in the Sasquatch question during the 1960s. He was known in Northern California before the Bosberg cripple incidents, but it was the Bosberg cripple incident that made him famous. And he was the biggest yarn spinner of the time and storyteller. John Green knew him very well. I only met him twice in his later years. But Ivan was a Class A bullshit artist, to put it politely. He was a man who would tell stories and spin a yarn and he had a little dog that he was telling John and Renee about, where he'd wind the dog's tail and get the dog all excited, and he'd have the dog attack an old tire tube and say that's his Sasquatch dog, and the tire's filling in for the Sasquatch, and it's going to tear a Sasquatch apart for him.
Almost like Bobo's monkey.
Oh yeah, I mean he was a guy who loved being the center of attention, and he would spin a yarn and tell a tale to remain the center of attention.
Right.
He even made his own movie called The Legend of Bigfoot, I believe it was called. It's Ivan Marx, and you always know it's him because he always used the American term Bigfoot, being an American, but he'd never say it calmly, Bigfoot. He'd say, Bigfoot! You know, he'd say, I looked behind me and I saw him. It was Bigfoot. That was Ivan Marx. A hell of a nice guy, but an absolute bullshit artist. And whenever I come across someone today, I won't mention any names, Randy Bresson, Todd Standing, a few others, guys who who are always having these encounters with so-called Sasquatch, and they tell these incredible tales, and yet they can never back it up with anything.
But they got video.
Actually, most of them don't.
No.
Or they get video of a stick it dropped, or a stone it threw, or a stick glyph it made, or something of that nature.
Randy Person's got video.
Because I knew Ivan Marx, and he was the first example, I decided to name this affliction after him. I call it Ivan Marx syndrome.
Yes.
Because he was really the first sample of this I ever knew. And he was the original sufferer of Ivan Marx syndrome.
Now, what did Rennie DeHinden think of Ivan?
Rennie would just call him, that little bullshit artist. That's what he referred to them as. John Green, the late John Green, he just think of him and just have a big broad smile and start laughing every time he thought of him.
Yeah.
But Ivan, he was a character. There's no doubt about it. He was an absolute character, and he's fondly remembered in the Sasquatch field. Unfortunately, he was the vanguard for every snake oil salesman who calls himself a researcher out there.
What about Grover Krantz? He gave him a little bit more credibility than some researchers.
Well, the late Grover Krantz believed, and I still think it's possible too, that a set of tracks that Ivan Marx was involved in, and we talked about that a few moments ago, called the Bosberg cripple prints, may have been authentic, because he really didn't start spinning a lot of tales until after this. And when this was going on, he was the center of attention, but then the attention died down. And then he started making stuff up and making all kinds of claims, and somehow got people to finance the making of professional movies starring himself.
Right.
And he did what he had to do to remain the center of attention. But, of course, he was blowing it out his ass, to be perfectly frank about it.
Well, you know what? In one of our future videos, I'd like to go over the timeline of how things occurred. You know, who found what trackways and when the casts actually appeared and
Oh, the Boschberg crippled prints?
right.
Right. That was the Boschberg incident dominated the Sasquatch field as it existed then in 1969 in late summer and autumn and fall in the Boschberg area of Washington State.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody who was anybody in this field was down there at the time, and they all had to divvied up in different warring camps.
Right.
And Ivan Marx was just the center of attention of them all, and he was like the UN in between three feuding armies trying to cross each other's border.
Great.
And he just lapped it all up.
All right, well, we'll cover that in a future video.
Roger that.
Thanks, Thomas.